Dzień dobry. So as a punk, I have to remove this suit. Thank you. It is lovely to be here. For those of you who remember me from last year, I talked about qualifications, but I guess my speciality field is in social media. What I call a curriculum of chaos, where the learning happens all the time without a structure. Yet, ironically, I'm now talking to you about a very structured way of learning, but that still has online and digital as part of it. And I think I've had a love affair with digital and work and interactions for about 20 years now. So this is another way of me expressing my love. So we are talking about MOOCs. So today, I'm going to be exploring what MOOCs are. So with very difficult to see, if you could put your hand up if you've heard of the term MOOCs before. Yes, a few of you. And put your hand up if you've enrolled on a MOOC and are active. Good, we have a few people. Because when I said to my Mum, I've enrolled at Harvard, she was just about to get on the phone to tell the family when I said not really, just virtually. So I needed to make that distinction. But yes, I'm enrolled on a couple of MOOCs. So we'll talk a little bit about what MOOCs are. So the way to break the letters down is that it is massive, open, online courses. And even the word courses seems like it's an old way to talk about learning, but this is clearly a new way to package learning content using the power of digital. So where Jerry talked about skill pills and mobile learning and the time elapsed of 2 to 3 minutes, if I were to use an analogy of a tree, that's like a bonsai tree, because a MOOC is like a sequoia. It is the complete opposite. It is enormous. It isn't a pocket garden. It is massive. It is huge. But it's huge for a number of reasons. And so those reasons are that it isn't about short e-learning modules. I guess its spirit is more about 20 hours of learning content compared to 20 minutes of learning content. So that says something to you about the level of commitment you need. But the good news is it's built from high-quality academic content. So I guess you could understand that universities and education establishments were thinking everything's going digital, we've tried using some e-learning in our courses, but we have so much fantastic knowledge that we can share with people. How can we do this? So that's largely where we're looking. We're looking at degree-level content here. And it's existing content that's being digitised. It's existing materials which would have either been in the tutor's head or would have been in a big textbook somewhere. It's all now been digitised from existing programmes and some new ones. And the great thing about it being massive is you can very quickly reach thousands, if not millions, of students, many of whom would have had no opportunity to access this level of high quality content at all. So that's the massive. The next bit is open. And the open thing is a very important factor within MOOCs. Because I guess the principles around open are that it isn't restrictive to qualifying criteria. So if you were a bit of a punk and a rebel at school and you didn't study to a certain level, you're not excluded from enrolment in a MOOC just because you haven't attained a certain level of academic ability. And David talked earlier on about a democratisation of learning, and what MOOCs are attempting to do, I think, is democratise education. So the MOOC principle and philosophy is very much what you find in the Fuse School. And if you're familiar with things like the Khan Academy, it is very much about accessibility to many people who otherwise would never have had access to that content. And it's open also as well because many MOOCs are entirely free. You do not have to pay a subscription fee. You do not have to buy any kind of content at all. Normally, the enrolment of these is simple, and I'll show you how as I talk through. So anyone from anywhere can enroll. It's not restricted by a timetable. Many MOOCs have a start point and an end point, but that's only really if you want to enroll and follow a traditional lesson format with timetables. Normally these are then made available to anybody to use afterwards, to use your own timetabling around. So when Jerry talks about using a mobile device and how quickly you need to pull down the content, For those of you that have Kindles and iPads and readers, you're quite happy to read, a 60,000 word novel on an iPad or a Kindle reader. And the same quality, I think, is part of the MOOC system, that actually you can still use mobile devices, so you can snatch at some of the learning. You don't have to sit at a particular time and a point. And the other good thing about MOOCs is what it's trying to do is create a virtual cohort so that you can have human interaction with your other students through digital means. So we do find people having wiki conversations and hangouts and connecting with each other using technology. They may be in Nigeria, they may be in Warsaw, but they're working on the same open course platform. So of course the other O is online, and that's of course why we're here to talk about e-learning. And this one's a really simple one, because it's delivered through internet connectivity, it's digitized content, and that's it really. So the online aspect is literally that all the content that would normally have been delivered through a classroom has now been available through the means of the technology we've been hearing about today. And then this course word. I think for a while in learning and development, the word course has started to become a little bit of a dirty word, as in you shouldn't call it a course because that implies teaching and it's an old kind of language frame. But actually these things are still based around academically proven content that constitutes a course program. Some people have reclaimed this C in MOOCs and they've called it a massive open online collaboration. So there are other ways to look at the C in that content. But it is about that existing academic study programs that were normally available at the likes of Stanford and Harvard and Yale in some of the big universities in the US, made available to anybody in that sort of format. And it is structured with pathways to learning. So I'm doing a couple of MOOCs, and one I'm doing at the moment is around neuroscience, and there is a structure to how I'm able to learn about neuroscience, and then how I can then use that and apply that in my professional endeavours. The good news is there's also a tutor, there is an expert, there is a face of somebody who's an expert in that particular subject who just happens to have been digitised by the form of recorded lectures and conversations and presentations. And then there are examinations optional for this. For some people this is a high quality aspect of a MOOC because it can prove their learning with an academic certification. To other people, me included, the learning is important, the certification isn't important. So it's an optional element to actually test at the end of the course that you have learnt according to the criteria that most normal degree level courses would have. And then, of course, there's the study groups, as I mentioned earlier on. So that's the course element to it. So how do you do MOOCs? How do you get involved in MOOCs? For those of you that are, obviously you've done this already, but I think there are two ways you start to think about using a MOOC. And the first one is, as we've described a lot today, you have a learning need, you have a gap, you have something which you want to learn which will help you become better in a particular field. And so the way you do that is you use the power of the web to search for providers' databases and use search engines to find them. But also, there's a growing community of MOOC participants who are active on social platforms. And I found that you can find them and actually then talk to them, engage with them about the content and the level of learning and how applicable it is. So you can let the wisdom of the crowd sometimes determine which MOOC you enroll in. The other point is a little bit like when you log on to Amazon and you think, I don't really know what I want, but let's have a look at what's on Amazon. And then, of course, Amazon's intelligent enough to tell you things that you've bought in the past and things you may then want to buy to enhance your product. So you can go on a trolley dash, and it's probably the only time I'll ever use that phrase in education, but literally you could have an empty shopping basket, walk around the MOOC environment and just put some courses in your trolley because they're free, you can use them whenever you want them, and so it's something you can indulge yourself. And that's kind of contrary to most of what we think learning is about. There's no specific need. But let's just say my work on the neuroscience MOOC has proven two things to me. One is that emotion trumps logic, and if you're drawn to a MOOC emotively, if you think, I really do want to learn that, I don't know how I'm going to apply it in my professional field, that's likely to determine your choice that you'll go for that MOOC. And then I guess the other factor involved in that is if it applies to a professional field but it may stretch you, that stretch may be something that if you tried to get funding for it from your employer, they would say doesn't fit the core competencies. But actually you may think, but I'm going to develop a whole new set of competencies by doing a particular MOOC here. So there are two starting points, have a need and also just have a desire, and maybe let that desire determine your choice. So here's some examples about what a MOOC looks like. So I've chosen edX, but there's also Coursera, Udacity, FutureLearn, and many, many more platforms now. So it's a quite welcoming environment, it's colourful, it's got search capabilities, and if we can look on here, there are 3 courses that have popped up at the top of the agenda as new courses to look at. One's a course on natural disasters, which is great if you're in that professional field, and the other one is about metrics and baseball. So you can see how diverse the content may be, but then there's a fairly traditional one, Introduction to Computer Science, over there on the far right as you look at it. And it will show you what academic institution has actually built that MOOC and provided it for you. And bear in mind that places like Harvard aren't necessarily renowned for their economic viability for most people, but clearly what Harvard have recognised is a lot of their education content should be set free and to liberate a lot of learners across the world. So with this one in particular, I went into the search box. I fancied a look at Harvard, that was one of the options, but equally there are other universities on there, so you can even try the let's have a look at what the universities have on offer criteria. And in the end with this one, I settled on behavioural economics, because actually behavioural economics really interests me, nudge theory, and how people think and purchase and make decisions and so on. And I then found out that this is from the University of Toronto, and I then did a little bit of research on the University of Toronto, very highly regarded, with a very professional business school, Rotman, attached to it, which is great on economics. So I felt, in my mind, this was a very viable and high-value choice. I then worked out how much it would cost me, both in lost revenue in work, transport to Toronto, and the purchases I'd need to make my wife to allow me to go and spend about 4 months in Toronto. And it was probably about £50,000, so I thought I'll do the free version. And then I'm around to do the gardening at home. So behavioural economics, I enrolled literally by email, created my password and my username, and that's it. That's all I needed to do. That's all it needed from me. Just the validation that I'm interested in it, who I am, and where I can be contacted. So then you get a kind of a course dashboard. So these are the 2 MOOCs I'm enrolled in through edX. So the fundamentals of neuroscience and behavioural economics in action. So these show that these are the 2 courses I'm actively involved in at the moment. And then you have a very simple interaction screen which looks at course information, it looks at updates, it looks at news, it looks at when there are particular events which if you enroll at a certain point in time you may be able to join in with live discussions. So if you're quite happy to consume content once the course is finished, which I'm doing with both of these MOOCs, that's absolutely great, you can do that. But if you want to have it feel like a more traditional degree programme, you can enroll when it's open and you can follow the path of the timetable, which allows you to then digitally connect with your fellow students and your course tutors. So you do still get that human interaction through this. And it's a very simple process of connecting to it with a wiki, with discussion threads and so on. Many people I know who have completed MOOCs have enjoyed coming onto the stream after it's finished, because a lot of the deductive reasoning and some of the exploration has been done by a cohort that preceded them. So they're actually using other learners' inputs and realizations which have been populated in the wiki. So actually you can benefit from the wisdom of other people who have already completed the course for you. Some might argue that's cheating. Some might argue it's like copying homework. I say it's using the brain power of other people to accelerate your own learning. And so there's an example of a screen, an introduction to behavioural economics. So it's just like a video clip that we've seen a number of people will be playing. Some of them can be quite long, some of them are shorter, so they're varied the level of content. Some are downloadable, readable content, so they're trying to appeal to all sorts of learning styles here. But the majority of the content on a MOOC is quite readily accessible and quite easy to obtain and ingest. And so once you've had a look at some of that content, if you're quite enjoying that MOOC and you wanted to add another one, In the UK, we have what we call kind of aggregator sites. So if you want to buy car insurance, you can just go and search comparethemarket.com. There's almost comparetheMOOCs.com now, where a lot of people have aggregated a number of MOOCs across the whole of the world, really, to help you make a more informed choice. So you can see really how MOOCs as a study format is now starting to engender almost like its own set of enthusiasts and people who can help you make discerning choices. So if you're feeling like it's a big sequoia tree you have to climb, other people have climbed it and can tell you what the view's like. There is, of course, another option about using MOOCs, and that is to integrate them into your other learning and development offerings, which may include a suite of e-learning products that you build or secure. It may include traditional classroom and coaching and mentoring, but it's certainly a lot less expensive than sending someone on a business school residential course. So it's a great alternative to that. So integration into especially leadership development programs is now something I'm seeing a lot of in the UK. And it also allows this thing where learners can stress test themselves, and I think this is an important concept. So sometimes people may say, I want to do an MBA, and they sign up, and you start to think about funding, and actually go on the MBA and they realise cognitively they probably haven't got the horsepower to complete an MBA and get a good grade. This would allow somebody to test their own mental ability in a pretty complex subject for free. And so literally you can try before you wanted to commit to anything that had a revenue or a capital expend on it. And you can try it flexibly. You can try it for 2 weeks or maybe just some of the content. If it's not for you, there is no consequence to dropping out. Many people who criticise MOOCs will point to the high dropout rate and say, look, it's not as effective. I say, actually what it is, it's people who are making choices saying, that content's not for me. I haven't got the time for that content. It's not valid. I'll just let it go. So the consequence of that is they haven't really wasted anything more than a bit of exploration and a bit of self-checking on their ability to complete that particular study program. And then I think the key thing for me is this high-quality, high-end learning accessible to all. So whether you happen to work in a farm in Nepal, or whether you happen to work on a factory site in Spain, and you wanted to do something with real high-quality academic content, you now have the ability to do that. And that, I think, has to be applauded by the academic institutions that have thrown the kind of MOOC equation into the mix for learning. But the other exciting thing for me, and this is a project I'm working on at the moment, is you can build your own MOOC. So again, I think with building a MOOC, you probably don't want to just create something on a whim, so maybe start with a learning need. So what would you need a MOOC to do? And I think there's something about why would you need it? It may be that it's a very fresh and relevant topic to you. In the example Jerry talked about with Dell moving from a hardware supplier to a more service-oriented organisation, they could have created their own MOOC about the shift and the skills that they needed based on what they'd already experienced themselves. So you don't need other people's content. You probably have a lot of content. You could create your own massive open online course. And it's about the benefits of scale and cost and reach and format. So I think there is something about the weightiness and the depth of a MOOC that probably feels much more like it's an achievement. So it might appeal to your people who like to climb mountains rather than just walk around the block. And then I think you decide on a platform, and of course that's an important part of this. The user experience and the interaction is pretty important. So I think if you built a pretty poor website, you'd find people drifting away quite quickly. So I think the user experience is critical. And I think we can learn a lot from those 20-minute, 2-minute kind of e-learning modules we've built to look at how we could position appealing content. But I think it's a way of you bringing lots of lessons and materials and learner sharing and some tracking too. I mean, again, I wouldn't say that this is a completely school-compliant environment, but you may want people to feel a sense of progress, if nothing else. You may not need to track their completion against it unless it was something mandatory, but I think there's something about the fact that you could track some of the achievements that people garner from using a MOOC. So how do you do that? One of the things I'm working on at the moment is a very agile methodology, I guess, for the development of it. So lots of quick and iterative design, which is very rapidly tested and deployed, so that actually what you don't do is try and create a MOOC in a laboratory environment, launch it, and it's actually not that good a user experience. So I think something iterative is definitely how I'd recommend you do this. And I think involve people who've used MOOCs. So I think you want people to help you design a MOOC who've had experience of learning in that fashion before, because they'll know whether a wiki should have a long thread or whether the wiki should be something that actually is user-generated and creates clusters of content of its own volition. And then I think we can create a studio or a beta version of it so that you can track and share and create content and do that testing as you go along. And the MOOC I'm creating for the CIPD, which is the largest professional HR body in the UK, is around social media for HR. So here's just a screen grab of our MOOC studio. So we have a course format. We have an introduction. We have an intro to Twitter and Google+. We have a bit about online profile. We have a little bit about coping and creating and collaborating with content. We have something about the changing world of work. We have something about using social media tools for HR. And then we have something about what does the company look like online. So we've already started to think about how we could segment a huge amount of content. And the great thing about this MOOC is the MOOC will be a launch pad, because all the exercises for using social media should really be conducted on social media platforms. So we're allowing people to start on the MOOC and then jump out to a social platform to run a Twitter chat or to post a YouTube video or to find some content that's useful for them. So we're trying to bring in a more sort of flexible solution to this. So I guess there's some benefits and some disbenefits to talk about. They are so accessible, MOOCs. Literally, you could go home tonight and enroll at Harvard or Stanford like I did. And they're largely free, so you don't have to actually spend any money on the particular course. It is outstanding content, it's proven. And it fits a degree level qualification, even if you don't want to get the degree. But I like the fact that you can dabble and you can try and you can alter the courses that you take based on your experiences, so you can kind of naturally select where you want to go. But as a result, the negatives are, it can be quite an overwhelming choice. You could probably find that shopping trolley full up with lots of options of MOOCs you could do, so you may need to make some careful choices on that. And there are high dropout rates. So a lot of people will point to MOOCs and say that probably if we're lucky, 7% of people who enroll will complete a MOOC. That's quite low, very low. However, again, I think the argument is it is kind of easy come, easy go. So I think the commitment is something that obviously is down to the individual learner and the relevance of the learning. But still some people doubt their credibility. So there are a number of people who say, well, how do we really know that they've kind of taken on the learning around neuroscience, and so therefore would I trust them to be my executive coach if that's all they've done? I guess there's something about the experience that they will be able to show you through interactions, and that actually if they've done a MOOC, they should be able to talk quite readily about the content of the MOOC and what they've learned and how they experienced it. So there are ways to test it, but I think it still has a credibility gap out there in the world of academia particularly. So just to summarise, I think these are the main points. It is disrupting education for sure, so it is part of what people are calling the flipped classroom approach. It is most certainly democratising education, which I think is a fantastic thing to see. It isn't a replacement for degree studies, it's more a supplement, and I think that's where I'd echo what Jerry's talking about with mobile learning. It's not instead of, it's as well as, and a complement to. It is a good way to deploy high quality content you would otherwise never get your hands on. And you can create your own MOOC. And there's a certain degree of excitement with creating your own MOOC, because I think, if anything, what you can do with a MOOC is kind of go beyond e-learning. So hopefully I've sparked your interest on MOOCs. Remember the bonsai tree and the sequoia example. It's a commitment, but it's exciting in some respects. It's easily dropped, it's easily started again. It's flexible, it's online, and it could potentially enrich a whole host of opportunities for us. So I've enjoyed talking to you about it, and hopefully in November you'll find a MOOC for social media and HR if you're interested in studying in that format. So I look forward to seeing you online. Thank you very much.